Been thinking about doing this for a while, and it's a very exhausting topic, but it needs to be done. So you can see the title of the video is Emissaries of Hell, When Clerics Become Enemies of the Commonwealth. And I figured I would start by going over the recent occurrences in the Lafayette Diocese, which the Society of St. Peter Damian has covered so well. And to do that, I think it makes sense just to show you some of their posts on their Facebook group, if I can. So we'll go over to Facebook. And you'll see January 18th, they just post simply, "It's not over." They link the Guardian article, "Arrest of Priest for Child Molestation Reignites Scandal in Louisiana Diocese." We have after this, Diocese of Lafayette, can you confirm that Bishop Dustin Tell and Father Jared Swear knew about the allegation against Father Corey Laverne since the first half of December, and yet allowed him to remain in ministry for the month leading up to his arrest instead of removing him while the allegation is investigated, as is policy in some other dioceses? And then we have a citation of the rectory living policy and some suggestion that he apparently had a 17-year-old teenager living with him in the rectory prior to the allegations. Then we have, after that, we have an interesting insight regarding the fact that some people were saying, he's innocent until proven guilty. Well, what about the child who came forward and said, I was abused? Is he innocent or is he guilty? If the priest is innocent until proven guilty, what about the child who comes forth? So suspending judgment is one thing, but the problem with this scenario is that it happens so often. It's like, it's a never-ending story, right? It's, the sex abuse scandal of the post-Vatican II church over the last, 50 years or longer. Well, why does it keep happening? We have the settlement of the bankruptcy with the Archdiocese of New Orleans over this exact issue. And then right after that news, we get Father Corey Laverne in Lafayette Diocese. So what's the deal, right? It's like, are the settlements, are the bankruptcies, are the apologies, are the public statements, are the question and answer sessions, are those all just smokescreens to sort of release liabilities, to let go of these foot soldiers who misstep in order to maintain the modus operandi of the whole, to maintain the integrity of the whole? And I'm not talking about the whole of the church, I'm talking about the whole of the sodomite mafia, right? The lavender mafia, because this is what it is. And we're talking about ecclesiastical capture to such an extent that, I'd say it's unprecedented. We should be looking at clergy as guilty until proven innocent at this point, because, the exception proves the rule, doesn't it? We also have a statement from Society of St. Peter Damian, just asking if they're going to, is there going to be retaliation against the priest who came forward to out Father Corey Laverne, which I think makes sense, because it seems that those priests seem to be the ones who are marginalized, the ones who come forward, which again plays into the narrative that the standard operating procedure of diocesan clergy is to essentially form a sodomite cohort where they can live and operate within the structure of the church, be given a comfortable living, be given esteem in the community, and be able to continue to pursue their selfish desires, whether it's abusing children or self-abuse, and abusing each other. And we have another article, got some information about total loss, etc. And whose money is that, right? Is that the clergy's money? Or is that the laity's money? So we get to pay for the privilege of being kind of lumped in, right, as Catholics with pedophiles and homosexuals. And they collect our money, and it goes to pay for their little smokescreen operations to continue their lifestyle. So, we get to pay millions of dollars, over $100 million in the case of the Archdiocese of New Orleans, to what? Protect sodomy? Great. Got this information about how Father Laverne was the assistant master of ceremonies in 2019, a year after he was ordained. So one thing to keep in mind is that dioceses, when they admit a seminarian, they know more about that seminarian than anybody else on earth, barring maybe, government intelligence agencies. So they go through background checks, they go through extensive psychological batteries. So there's really no excuse, for ordaining someone like this. There's really no excuse. You know more about this person than anyone else. And then you choose to ordain them. You choose to make them a priest. You choose them and put them in a position of influence, a position of trust, position of power. Where's the excuse at this point? How can you just say, oh, we're grieved by this? No, you knew this was going to happen. And I could even go so far as to say that you planned such that if this happened, you would have an out, because you knew it would happen. And it's almost like you planned for it to happen. Is the whole plan for this to happen in one way, shape, or form? Because this is homosexual activity, right? The kid's a minor, but it's still male on male. So I haven't heard anything about where he is. What's he doing? Here's what he has done. Where is he now? What's he doing? How about some transparency, right? We're kidding ourselves if we want that. Not if we want it, but if we think it's coming. And then an interesting sequence of events whereby the diocese just seems to become less and less transparent as more allegations come out against a few different priests. So we should keep an eye on this situation. But to some extent, it's not necessary to follow it play by play. We've got all kinds of scenarios like this across the country. They're happening all the time, probably happening every day. If you read some of Eugene Gomulka's work, the statistics are pretty horrific. We're talking about over half of the U.S. clergy being homosexuals. And the problem with that, aside from, it itself being, of course, a major crisis that the church hasn't seen before at this scale, is what about the other priests who aren't homosexuals? Well, they have to know what's going on. And so, some of them, it seems, that I've encountered have this mindset that if they just keep their heads down and try to do a good thing in their own parish, that's enough, right? But that's unfortunately false, and it makes them complicit in the crimes that their brother priests are committing. Now, I understand the consequences are severe. If you do stand up and say something, if you do out these priests, if you do come forward to the civil powers, I understand the consequences. They're very severe. You've given everything to this vocation, and it will take everything away from you when that occurs, or the diocese will take everything away from you. They'll marginalize you. They'll push you to the fringes. Maybe they'll put you on leave. Maybe they'll send you for psychological counseling. Who knows? But they'll ruin you. I get it. But this is our religion, and Catholics will understand it when I say that our religion is a death cult, in the sense that, and I'm being hyperbolic and ironic when I say that, but in the sense that death is, in fact, going to happen, but the death of the self is necessary for salvation. And so going to Calvary with Christ is considered the greatest honor. So these priests that do get marginalized, that are abused, that are threatened, that are pushed to the fringes, that are stripped of their basic needs, they're walking with Christ to Calvary. That's the goal. So in order to be a true priest of Christ, which you signed up for, you can't just keep your head down and try to, quote unquote, do a good thing in your own parish when you know that the entire institutional bureaucracy is run by sodomites. And that is the case. And for those of you who don't believe that, I'm very sorry. But that's the case. And you need to lift the veil from before your eyes and understand it. And the question to ask yourself is, is my faith worth more than the priest who gives me the sacraments? And should I allow corrupt clergy to hold the sacraments hostage, in the sense that I allow my fear of losing them to keep me from doing the good and righteous and just thing, which is to come forward and oppose these people because they are emissaries of hell. And I mean bishops and priests. Now, I have personal experience applying to Archbishop Gregory Aymond and the Vicar General of New Orleans for assistance in a serious matter regarding a priest, and basically being gaslighted and treated as if I ought to know that I should just accept Stockholm Syndrome, and I should just capitulate, and I should just, go away, because we've done our investigation and found that we've done nothing wrong, right? We've investigated ourselves and we found no wrongdoing. So we live in a very crazy world where the church is completely infiltrated, down to from the shoulders to the toes. It's very difficult, and it's very hard for people. I think a lot of people are struggling in the sense that they don't want to admit them to themselves. They don't want to admit that to themselves. They just want to live sort of like this wholesome Catholic life, have a community, have a parish life, see their friends, and live in this world where everything's going to be okay. But unfortunately, the case is that everything is most certainly not going to be okay. It's going to be good, but it's not going to be okay. It's going to be great. It's going to be better than okay. But we have to go through this tremendous passion in the church where seemingly, from the outside, you might say, oh my goodness, the laity, the lay people, the regular Catholics are pitched against the hierarchy. And of course, that won't be the case, because what will be the case is that the laity are protecting the purity of the offices of priest and bishop. And there is precedent for this. So while the laity cannot pick up the spiritual sword, right, and enact ecclesiastical penalties, canonical penalties, they can enact penalties according to the temporal sphere. So, for instance, some Italian communes rose up and banished bishops and took away their influence, right, their power, but they didn't presume to try to take their office from them. I believe it was a French prince had to exile a bishop. So you have situations like this in the past and the church's history where, the ecclesiastical arm, the spiritual arm of the church isn't doing its job. And perhaps it's so corrupt. I believe it was in the case of the Italian communes, it was so corrupt that just there was no justice whatsoever. So those ecclesiastical functionaries were supposed to be disciplining priests, just weren't doing it, or disciplining bishops, just weren't doing it. And it was such a harm to society that the lay people rose up and said, hey, we're not taking this anymore. You're an enemy of the Commonwealth. And because you're an enemy of the Commonwealth, we're going to punish you in such and such a way. We're not going to presume to enact any, again, canonical penalties or to try to strip you of your office. We're not going to presume that. But we are going to put you in a situation where you don't have any influence or power because you're such a pernicious force in society. Now, this is difficult in our current day because we have, on the one hand, corrupt and illegitimate civil powers, civil government. And then on the other hand, we have very, very corrupt. Illegitimate is difficult to say. That's something that God will have to judge. Illegitimate in the sense of wielding authority unjustly. As far as the validity of their orders, that's something only God will be able to tell. And we find ourselves trapped in the middle, right? Because our civil government, which is illegitimate and corrupt, doesn't understand and operate by canon law. So whenever there are tremendous evils being done to the laity in violation of canon law, well, to whom do we appeal? Go to the bishop. But the bishop's in on it. It's like, a mafia hitman kills your friend, and so you go to the head of the mafia family to complain. There's, it's completely nonsensical. Now, the paper trail might be good because when we have to advance to more pronounced, more public remonstration of those in ecclesiastical office, it's a very grave thing, and we have to have done what the church requires. But at the end of the day, and as there is much precedent for, those corrupt priests and bishops have to be called out publicly. So I've sat down here tonight, finally, after a long time, after a long struggle with a local priest, with the local dean, with the archbishop, the vicar general. And I've already submitted documents to the archbishop. I've sat down and met with the archbishop. I've sat down and met with the vicar general. Nothing but gaslighting and garbage, frankly. And it was not just me who met with the archbishop. It was myself and 2 other men. And sent all the documentation to the nuncio. And here we are, without justice. So recently, as someone who was close to this priest, defected from him, and it's Father Damien Zablocki, and defected from the Our Lady of Mount Carmel Latin Mass community, because of her own very negative experiences that really do resonate with the other testimonies that we collected. And it's heartbreaking, but it's necessary to go through these things. So I'm just going to cover briefly some of the key allegations. And the first that I'll mention are from signed witness testimony. So I'm just going to read this question and answer from sort of an interview format email. See if I can share it on the screen. So I'll just share. Let's see. Yeah, good. All right. So this testimony is signed on each page by Ramonda Cook. You can say May 20th, 2025. This question is, did you always know that Damien was homosexual? Did he try to hide it from you at first? Did he openly admit it to you? Damien was living in New Jersey when he first contacted me. He'd called me to talk to me about Father Will. Father Will did not remain the topic of the conversation for very long. Soon, Damien was telling me about his love for Louisiana and New Orleans. I could tell in his voice that he was a bit feminine. I tried my best to stay just open-minded. He started to tell me about his experience in seminary, and that he was just taking a break from school. He said he was dismissed from St. Vincent Seminary, but he didn't clarify the reasons. He volunteered to me that he was heterosexual and a virgin. I didn't believe this from the start. I figured he was just trying to protect himself. I wasn't wrong. I guess he thought maybe I'd find him more likable as a heterosexual virgin. It was probably close to a year after knowing him before he told me that he was gay. The only reason he shared this with me is because of a man named Ott Howell. Ott works at the Beauregard Keys house in the French Quarter. Ott was once a married man and has a couple of kids who are now grown. Ott is homosexual and has shared with me that he's known to sleep with priests and married men, which was quite interesting given that he and Damien were so very close. Damien told me that he loved Ott because he saw Ott as a father figure since he lost his dad when he was younger. After my falling out with Damien, when he essentially held me hostage, Ott and his daughter deleted me from their Facebook friends lists. Damien and I spoke a few times since that incident. I told him to keep my name out of his mouth and to not tarnish my reputation as I have not tarnished his. I'd mentioned to him about Ott and Catherine's sudden disappearance from my social media pages after they'd spent countless hours telling me about how lovely they thought I was. Damien's response to all of this was simply something along the lines of, they were being kind to you because of me. They saw through your bullshit. Damien has entertained several gay men in the time that I had been close to him. One guy stayed the night with us. I didn't approve as Damien was interested in returning to seminary someday. So I left the house in the middle of the night. Damien wanted to end our friendship over it, claiming that I was jealous and petty. We have some information here from Ramonda about parties. So Damien attended all of these events, it says, in relation to the statement. Ott also had parties for gay pride and decadence. You can see that bars Damien frequented were Good Friends, the pub, Oz. He loved the drag shows there, and the Golden Lantern. There's also some information here about when Damien visited with the Archbishop. And it's right here. It says, one last statement I'd like to make. Prior to being accepted into the seminary in New Orleans, Damien met with the Archbishop Gregory Amond. Damien told me that Gregory Amond was thrilled to have Damien at the seminary. The Archbishop was very open to Damien's sexuality, but told Damien that he was the only person who could know. The Archbishop then would send text messages to Damien late in the evenings, 10 p.m. or later. Excuse me. And Damien would always announce, excuse me, would always announce it to me, giggling like a schoolgirl, that he was the Archbishop's pet. So that's just one testimony. There's a testimony from Bart Swallow, who's the father of a girl who well, I don't want to go into it. But let's just say that there was a sexual issue between two minors, one older, one younger, at a party at Our Lady of Mount Carmel in the building after Easter Vigil, where there was mixed company and alcohol. This would have been in the wee hours of the morning. That's a whole other issue that is just rife with problems. If you're interested, there's a sheriff's report now. There's a report by Father Ken Allen called Tachemoto. I'd like to read from that. I don't know if there's time, but I'm going to post as many of the documents as I can, or at least make a link available to all those documents below the video. I just don't know how much more I have energy for at this point. Damien never should have been admitted to seminary. See, this allegation was never addressed by the Archbishop or by the Vicar General. Instead, they tried to argue that I didn't understand what deep-seated homosexual tendencies meant because there's an instruction from the Holy See saying that these people can't be admitted into seminary. My response to that can be seen in my public letter, public filial correction to the Archbishop, which is also signed by John Kerr and Jim Hitt. The link to that document will also be below. I also have from a recent source that Father Damien has another residence in the French Quarter. I don't know how usual that is for a priest to have a second residence, especially in the French Quarter. But it's just something to keep in mind. I'm tired. It's late. And this is a frustrating topic. So I'll just let you decide for yourself. The one thing I would warn against is just keeping your head down and just listening to your priest no matter what. Just letting things slide, just tolerating things, convincing yourself that everything's okay, convincing yourself that the things that you notice aren't real. Because over time, that's how you become complicit in those same crimes that I mentioned earlier. Fulton Sheen said, "It's the laity who will save the church." Maybe there's some truth in that. I just know that the laity at least need to start doing their duty to protect the church, protect her sacred offices, protect her children. Because so far, everything we've tried hasn't worked. So it's time to try something different.